Have you ever heard a scream so raw, so filled with terror, that it stopped your heart, and only then did you realize it belonged to your own child? What would you do, if the monster wasn't outside your home, but sleeping in your bed? What if the man who once placed a wedding ring on your finger, was now burning your daughter alive behind a locked basement door? I remember that night like a scar remembers the flame. It started with silence. Heavy. Watching. Waiting. Then came the scream, not the cry of a child afraid of the dark, but a howl that shattered glass. A sound so primal, it didn't belong in this world. A sound that should never come from a human throat, let alone your daughter's. I ran. Barefoot. Heart pounding. Hands shaking. I reached the basement. The door was locked. I banged. I screamed her name. And from the other side, I heard boiling oil. Splash. Sizzle. Then her voice, small, shredded, "Mama, please, it hurts." Then silence. Tell me, how do you live with that sound in your head? How do you wake up every morning knowing you did everything you could, except save her? Because the man who did it was my husband. A respected preacher. A man they still call holy. But on that night, he became something else entirely. She came back different. Not in a loud, rebellious way. No tattoos. No shocking words. No arrogance. But in her eyes, there was something new. Peace. Confidence. Like she had made peace with something deeper than religion. Like she'd touched the edge of the divine and knew it by name. She kissed me on both cheeks when she returned. Held me longer than usual. Her scarf slipped as we embraced, and I caught a glimpse of a small silver cross at her collarbone. She quickly tucked it back in, but I had already seen that. I didn't say a word. That night, over dinner, her father asked how university had been. She smiled politely. She spoke of professors, books, exams, travel. She didn't mention Jesus. Not yet, but I noticed she no longer joined prayers. She still bowed her head at the table, but not in the direction of Mecca. She still said "God willing," but in English now. She played hymns on her phone in the privacy of her room, soft enough that only a mother's ears could catch them through the door. I knew it would not stay hidden long. My husband, always watchful, began to notice too. At first, he was quiet, observing. Then came the questions. The tightening of rules. The tone in his voice when he spoke her name. The way his hand lingered just a little too long on the table, as if weighing the urge to strike it. One morning, he asked her outright. "Are you still a Muslim?" She didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head. She said, "I believe in God. I believe in love. I believe in truth. And his name is Jesus." I dropped the teacup I was holding. My husband didn't speak. He stood up, walked into the garden, and didn't return until nightfall. That evening, he removed her books from the shelf. Not angrily. Deliberately. Quiet rage is more terrifying than thunder. He asked her to sleep in the guest room. He locked the Wi-Fi. He disconnected her phone. He began to call in counselors from the mosque, men with beards and harsh eyes, who spoke only of hell and shame. She endured it all with silence, but silence doesn't always mean surrender. Late one night, I passed by her room and heard her whispering. I pressed my ear to the door. "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they do." It shattered me. She knew what was coming. And still, she prayed for him. For us. The next morning, I found a page from her journal torn and left on my nightstand. On it, she had written, "If truth costs me everything, then let me pay in full." I wanted to run with her. To take her hand and flee. But fear held me. I had other children. A life built in a place that would swallow me whole if I defied it. I kissed her forehead instead and said, "Be careful." She smiled softly and whispered, "Don't be afraid, Mama. Even if I walk through the fire, I will not be alone." I started to sleep lightly, like a mother with a newborn, though mine was grown and full of secrets that could kill her. Every sound in the house became a warning. A drawer opening. A footstep at night. A whisper behind closed doors. He was watching her, not as a father watches a child, but like a hunter studies prey. There was something cold in his gaze now. Mechanical. Controlled. And yet, beneath that control, I sensed something boiling. A fury he was trying to pray away. But it wouldn't leave him. It stalked him the way he stalked her. He no longer spoke Isla's name. He no longer allowed her to eat at the same table. He no longer looked at me the same way either. He asked why I hadn't stopped her. Why I hadn't disciplined her early. Why I let her rot her soul with foreign lies. I didn't answer. What could I say? That I too had once whispered those forbidden questions. That I too had once stared at the stars and wondered if God's voice sounded different than what they told us. Every night, I walked past her door, pressing my palm to the wood. I didn't dare knock. I just stood there, hoping she could feel it. Hoping my silence could hold her together a little longer, but she didn't need holding. She was stronger than any of us. One afternoon, I found her in the garden, sitting beneath the fig tree she used to climb as a child. Her journal was in her lap. She was humming something, soft and unfamiliar. It wasn't Arabic. It wasn't even a language I understood. But it felt like prayer. She looked up at me and smiled. "Do you think he hears me?" she asked. I didn't answer, not because I didn't believe, but because I did, and that terrified me. That night, my husband entered her room without knocking. I saw the door swing open from the hallway, saw his silhouette in the light. I heard her stand, heard the creak of the wooden floor beneath her bare feet. And then, the door shut. They didn't speak, not then, but something passed between them. Some wordless decision, and I knew something was coming. The next morning, he told me he'd be fasting, praying for the family, for our lost daughter. His voice was calm. Too calm. He took her phone. He removed the mirror from her room. He told her not to leave the house, and then, he took the key to the basement from its hook. That rusted little hook above the oven where it had hung untouched for years. That was when I knew. No one used the basement. Not since the flood, not since the rats. Not since, but now, it was clean. I had noticed bleach days earlier. The sharp scent on his robe. He was preparing. Isla, somehow, knew too. But she didn't fight. She didn't beg, she simply stared out the window that whole day, as if memorizing the shape of the clouds. That evening, I placed a soft blanket outside her door. And beside it, a small note: "If you're cold, or scared, knock once." She never knocked, but the blanket was gone by morning. It began with a scream. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just sound, raw, animal, torn from the gut of something sacred. I dropped the pot I was holding. It shattered. But I didn't hear it hit the floor. All I heard was that scream, then silence. A silence so heavy, it made the walls lean inward. I ran down the hallway, past the kitchen. My feet smacked the cold tiles. I tripped, caught myself, kept running. The basement door was closed, not locked. Just closed. I reached for the handle. It burned. He had done something, coated it in oil maybe. But I forced it open. Anyway, skin blistering. The stairs were wet, slippery, dimmed. I smelled it before I saw her. Burned flesh, burned cloth, burned faith. She lay on the ground, curled, shaking, her arms wrapped around her chest, her hair soaked in something dark. My husband stood over her, calm, holding a kettle, the kind used for tea. Stainless steel. Still hissing. He didn't look at me. He didn't flinch. He said, "She refused. That's all." Then he walked past me like I was nothing. I dropped to my knees. I reached for her, her lips were moving. Barely. She was praying, not for herself, for me. I pulled her close, cradled her like a child, whispering her name again and again. "Isla? Isla, I'm here. I'm here." Her skin blistered against mine. Her breath was thin. "Mama," one word. That's all she had left. Then she fainted. I screamed for help. No one came. My husband was upstairs, cleaning the kettle. My sons were at the mosque. The neighbors were silent. I carried her upstairs, wrapped in wet towels. She moaned once, then went still. I called the doctor. He answered. He heard my voice, and hung up. He knew, everyone knew, but no one would help, because no one crosses a man like him, because she was an apostate now, because to them, she deserved it. Isla spent 2 more days in bed. She drifted in and out, feverish, whispering scriptures in English. I sang to her old songs, one she loved as a child. I begged her to hold on, but I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't even angry, she was free, somehow, despite it all, and that terrified me more than anything, because she had found something no fire could take, something not even death could erase, and I I had only feared. I pressed my head to her chest, counting each shallow breath, and when the last one came, she smiled, and was gone. She died without a scream, after all the noise. After all the fire. After all the prayers that tore through her throat, her final moment was silent. A breath. A smile. Gone, and the world kept turning. The sun rose, birds sang. My husband made tea. I sat on the floor beside her bed, holding her cooling hand, willing her fingers to move, to twitch, to fight. But she was still. Her skin pale, lips dry, eyes shut, like she had finally fallen into a better dream. I wanted to believe she'd wake up, that this was just another fever, that the fire hadn't taken her, that maybe, just maybe, she had been spared. But the truth sat in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Isla was gone, and I had done nothing to stop it. He didn't bury her right away. He waited until just before dawn. He said we'd handle it quietly. That the neighbors didn't need to know. That it would shame the family to hold a public funeral. No imam was called. No prayers recited. He didn't wash her the way our traditions required. He wrapped her in an old bedsheet and placed her in the trunk of the car like she was luggage. I asked him where he was taking her. He didn't answer. I followed anyway. We drove to the edge of the city, to a barren lot, where forgotten people were buried. No stones. No markers. Just dry earth and fading names. He dug in silence. I tried to hold back the tears, knowing even those would be seen as rebellion. When he was done, he told me to say goodbye. I kneeled at the edge of the shallow grave and whispered, Isla, I'm sorry. And then I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I crossed myself, not out of habit, not out of faith, but because it was hers, because in that moment, I wasn't afraid of hell, I was already in it. When we got home, everything was already being erased. Her journals were gone, her clothes disappeared, the cross necklace vanished. He burned everything, like she had never existed. He told the children she had died of an infection. That her mind had broken. That she had gone too far with foreign ideas. They nodded. Swallowed it. Moved on. The house was silent again, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that grows mold, the kind that poisons food and makes flowers wilt in their vases. I wandered room to room like a ghost. I sat at the foot of her bed every night, hoping to catch her scent before it faded. I kept a single sock she left behind. Hid it under my pillow. It still smelled like her. I pressed it to my face when I cried, because that was all I had left. A sock. A memory, and the sound of her whisper, Mama, it hurts, still echoing in my skull like a curse I couldn't lift. I used to believe silence was safety, that if I kept my head down, folded my hands, obeyed, endured, then God would protect me. That He would protect my children. That He would reward obedience, even in suffering. But Isla obeyed her heart. And I obeyed fear. She died in fire, and I lived in ashes. I stopped praying. Not out of defiance. Out of emptiness. Every word felt hollow. Every verse tasted like dust. The God I once feared, where was He that night? Why did He allow my daughter to be slaughtered for loving Him? Or was it not Him she loved? Was it someone else? I found myself reaching for answers in secret. At first, I only opened her Bible to smell the pages, to feel where her fingers once turned them. But then, I read, not with belief, not with hunger, just curiosity. And then came the verse, she is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare to her. It hit me like thunder, because no one ever said that about women in my world. Not the imams. Not my husband. Not the elders, but Isla's God did. Her God called her precious, her God walked into fire for her, while mine watched her burned. I closed the book, and cried, not just for Isla, but for the parts of myself I had buried long before her, the questions, the songs, the laughter, the voice I had silenced to be called faithful. I thought of the first time I bled. How no one looked me in the eye. How they told me I belonged to my future husband now. How my worth was in my silence and my sacrifice. I thought of my wedding night. How no one asked if I wanted it. How I didn't even know what want meant. I had been taught that pain was holy. That obedience was purity. That my purpose was to serve. But Isla, she broke that chain. She chose a faith that called her daughter, that gave her a voice, and for that, they called her wicked. For that, they killed her. I looked in the mirror one Morning and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were dull. Her lips cracked. Her hands trembling not from age, but from grief. I traced the lines on my face and whispered, I'm sorry. Not to myself. Not to God. Her, Isla. I was your mother. I should have fought harder. I should have screamed louder. I should have burned with you, if only to let the world know someone loved you to the end. I didn't speak for weeks. My voice had forgotten how to rise. I moved like a shadow through the house, cooking when expected, nodding when spoken to, pretending to exist. But inside, something had shifted. There was a cracking. A slow, splintering ache growing behind my ribs. One night, I went into her room. I hadn't stepped inside since the night she died. Everything was clean. Too clean. Sterile. Lifeless, like someone had tried to erase her presence, but memory doesn't obey bleach. It lingers in corners, in drawer handles, in the faint dent of a pillow that once held her dreams. I sat on the floor beside her bed, knees to my chest, and opened the drawer. He'd forgotten, inside, a folded paper. Nothing more. I unfolded it with shaking hands, her handwriting, still alive on the page. It read, if I disappear, know that I never hated you. I saw the fear in your eyes. I saw your love trapped behind it. Don't let them bury your voice with mine. My breath caught. I pressed the note to my chest and sobbed, because she knew she wouldn't survive, and still, she left me a gift. A command. A hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the rooftop, staring at the stars, like I used to when I was a girl, but this time, I didn't ask the sky to rescue me. I asked for courage. The next morning, I broke the silence. I called her name aloud for the first time since she died, Isla. The walls didn't fall, the heavens didn't open, but something in me stirred. I began writing. At first, just lines. Memories. Then whole paragraphs. I wrote the truth, how she died. Why she died. What she believed. I didn't know who I was writing for, maybe just for me, maybe for her, but once the words came, they wouldn't stop. It was like breathing for the first time after years underwater, and I realized, this was her resurrection, not in flesh, but in story, her voice through mine, and if I stayed silent, she would vanish. Again. So I wrote more, then I spoke to a cousin I trusted, then to a neighbor's daughter. Then, one night, I sent her name into the world. An anonymous post. A single sentence, my daughter was burned alive for believing in Jesus. Her name was Isla. I didn't expect a response, but within hours, hundreds of women messaged, some with stories, some with prayers, some with names they hadn't dared say out loud until now, and in that flood of voices, I found mine. I wasn't alone, she wasn't alone. Isla didn't die in vain, not if the truth could still breathe through me. I knew the risks. I knew what they called women like me, apostate, liar, traitor, madwoman, but once you've watched your daughter's body wrapped in silence and buried without a name, fear becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. Isla had died for a name, Jesus. A name I had whispered once in secret, long ago, when I was still a girl who thought faith meant something more than control, and now, that name lived again, not in sermons, but in memory. In defiance. In fire. So I told our story first, in whispers, then, in full voice. I posted photos, old ones. Her laughing in the garden. Holding a book. Eyes full of light. I wrote what happened. No euphemisms. No apologies. At first, they tried to ignore me, then came the messages, liar. You deserved it. She was a curse. Then came the threats, anonymous numbers. Harsh voices. Men parked outside the house. A knock on the door that came just before midnight and never waited for an answer. I moved rooms each night, slept with shoes on, but I didn't stop, because in the quiet after the threats, there were other messages, too, from mothers, from daughters, from women who had never spoken aloud the pain they'd carried for years. They told me of basement bruises. Of burned Bibles hidden under floorboards. Of names whispered only in sleep, and every story felt like a brick placed in Isla's grave, but this time, not to bury her. To build her monument. I printed her photo and nailed it to a street pole near the mosque. She wore her cross, she smiled in that way that made men uncomfortable. The next day, it was torn down. I put up another, and another. One morning, I found a note beneath the poster. She was brave. And so are you. It was unsigned, but I recognized the handwriting. It belonged to a girl from the neighborhood. One who always walked with her head down. One whose wrists wore long sleeves even in summer. I left a Bible at her doorstep. No words. Just the book. It was gone the next day. Maybe that was foolish, maybe they'd trace it back to me, but for the first time since Isla died, I didn't care, because I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was trying to live, and living, I had learned, meant telling the truth, even when your voice shakes, even when no one believes you, even when they threaten to silence you. Forever Isla had done it. So would I. I stood in the courtyard where she used to read and whispered into the morning air, if you're listening, if you are who she believed you were, then give me strength. Not to escape, but to endure. Because this isn't just about her anymore, this is about every girl who's been forced to bow when her soul wanted to rise, this is about every mother who buried her child and was told to be silent, this is about faith, not the one. It started with stares, the kind that linger too long. That look away just as you turn your head, but not before they've carved judgment into your skin. The market. Women who once kissed my cheeks now pulled their children closer, men whispered. Behind prayer books, the butcher pretended not to hear when I asked for chicken, the pharmacist said the medicine was out of stock, though I could see it right behind him. I had become invisible again, not out of silence this time, but out of noise. My own, the noise of truth echoing louder than they wanted. Whispers grew into rumors. She's gone mad. She's cursed. Her daughter betrayed Islam, of course she was punished. Then came the men in robes. 3 of them with beards trimmed. Eyes cold. One held a folder. Another had a phone. The third didn't speak, he only watched me. They arrived unannounced. No warning. No summons, just a knock and a shadow that fell across the threshold like a warning. They called it a visit of concern. They said they wanted to understand my grief. But their questions weren't soft. Do you know the penalty for apostasy? Did you know what your daughter was doing? Do you believe she deserved her punishment? I didn't answer, not at first. Then, I looked at the quiet one. The one who hadn't spoken, and I asked him, do you have daughters? His jaw tightened. His eyes flickered. He didn't reply, but in that second, I knew this wasn't just about doctrine, this was about fear, because a girl like Isla, fearless, faithful, free, threatens men who build their power on obedience. She had chosen a different path, and I was choosing it now too. After they left, someone threw paint on my door. Red. Dripping. It wasn't subtle. The next morning, the landlord asked me to leave, not because of noise. Not because of rent. Your presence is making people uncomfortable, he said. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in months, because discomfort was good. Discomfort meant the silence was cracking. I packed my things, took only what mattered, her journal, her cross, and the page she left me, folded tight, worn at the edges, words like fire stitched into paper. Don't let them bury your voice with mine. I moved into a smaller place. Fewer windows. More locks, but I was free, not safe. Never that, but free, and in freedom, I found a strange kind of peace, not the peace they preach, the kind built on control, but the kind that comes when you know you're finally standing on truth, even if it costs you everything. It was never supposed to go viral. I thought I was writing into a void, an anonymous post on a quiet thread, a whisper tossed into the digital wind, but truth doesn't whisper forever. It shouts. Eventually, somehow, someone found it, screenshotted it, translated it, shared it, and within days, Isla's name trended, not in my city. Not even just in my country, but across oceans. #Justice for Isla, #Burn for Belief, #Faith Without Fear. The hashtags multiplied. Some called her a martyr, some called her a liar, some called her a symbol. She was none of those things. She was my daughter, and now, millions of strangers were saying her name. Interviews were requested, news outlets reached out, BBC, Al Jazeera, Christian channels in the West. Some wanted my voice, others wanted the scandal, but I had already learned, once you give the truth a face, it becomes a target. So I remained anonymous, but I didn't stay silent. I wrote articles, anonymous blogs. I gave interviews in shadowed rooms, voice modulated, eyes blurred, and still, they found me, not all of them, but enough. One day, I opened my inbox and found hundreds of messages, some kind, some cruel, some threatening. Your daughter deserved worse. You're next. He did the right thing. Thank you. I left Islam because of her story. I found Jesus because of Isla. I cry every time I hear her name. It was overwhelming. A wave crashing in all directions, then, the death threats began again, this time, more detailed. My location. My real name, even photos of my building. I moved again. Tighter. Smaller. No windows, just a bed, a kettle, and a desk where I kept three things: her photo, her Bible, and the first article I ever wrote, now yellowed at the edges. Isla's face stared back at me from protest signs overseas. College students held vigils in her name. Missionaries printed her story in tracts, but at home, where she lived, where she bled, she was still a ghost. They called me a traitor on national TV. A disgrace. A Western puppet. Even my own brother denounced me. He said I'd lost my mind, that I was ashamed of our faith. But what shamed me wasn't faith. It was what they did in its name. They burned my daughter, they buried her without prayer, and then, they tried to erase her. I couldn't let them win. So I doubled down. I spoke to human rights groups. I gave them documents, hospital records, before they vanished. Screenshots. Scans of her diary. One woman from France flew in just to meet me. She hugged me and wept. Said Isla had changed her life. That she wore a cross now because of her. I smiled, but deep down, I was terrified, because every time someone spoke her name, I felt both joy and dread. Joy that she was remembered, dread that it might get them killed, but Isla had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a war for memory, and I refused to let the enemy win. They called her a martyr. A symbol. A flame that refused to be extinguished, but I had to ask myself, would she have wanted that? Would Isla have wanted to be a hashtag, a movement, a headline on someone's feed between cat videos and politics? There were nights I couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of guilt. Had I turned her suffering into spectacle? Was I using her pain to ease mine? Each time someone thanked me for telling her story, I felt a chill. A small, quiet voice asking, but what if she just wanted to live? Because Isla hadn't died to inspire, she had died because no one stopped him, because I hadn't stopped him, because this world worships power and punishes questions, because she dared to call God Father instead of Master, and now, her name lit fires across the globe. While I sat alone in a room smaller than the one she died in. No family visited. No calls came. My sons refused to speak to me. My sister blocked me. Even the woman who once helped me deliver Isla at birth now walked past me on the street like I was diseased. Isla was everywhere, and yet, I had never felt further from her. Some nights, I imagined her knocking at the door, hair soaked in rain. A smile on her lips. I'm home, Mama. And I'd wake up to silence and the hum of a refrigerator in a kitchen too small for grief. I tried to pray again, but the words came out strange, stumbling, heavy. I didn't know which God I was praying to, the one they taught me to fear? Or the one Isla found and loved. Sometimes, I spoke to her instead. Isla, was it worth it? I knew that sounded cruel, but I needed to ask. I needed to hear something, and then, one day, I got a letter, not an email. A real letter, folded, handwritten, smelling faintly of lavender. It came from a woman in Brazil. She had read about Isla, she had left her own religion, quietly, dangerously. She now held secret meetings in her village. With candles. With scripture. With stories, and at the end of every gathering, they said a name. Isla, she's one of the saints to us, the woman wrote. We don't know her face, but we know her flame. I cried for hours, not because I was proud, but because I missed her so much. It felt like bleeding, because the world had taken her and made her holy, but I would have given anything to see her ordinary again. To scold her for leaving dishes in the sink. To argue over the laundry. To hear her laugh at a stupid joke on TV, but I only had echoes, and echoes, no matter how loud, can't hold your hand when the night comes. The email came at 2:07 a.m. Subject: Global Women of Faith Summit, invitation to speak. I stared at the screen, reading the words again and again. They wanted me to share Isla's story, not in secret, not in a blog, not behind blurred glass and a disguised voice, but in person. On a stage, with cameras, with names, with consequences. The summit would be held in Geneva. Security provided. Translators available. Press attendants expected, they offered to pay for travel, they promised protection, but no one could promise safety. I sat there, in the glow of my old laptop, shaking. Point one. Part of me whispered, this is it. The moment. The chance. The platform Isla never had. Another part screamed, you're not ready. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't brave. I was just a mother who had failed to save her child, and now the world wanted me to explain what that felt like, in 15 minutes, with a microphone. What if I broke down? What if I froze? What if I said the wrong thing? What if they found me? I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, but the questions didn't leave. They curled in my sheets. They crept behind my eyelids. For 2 days, I didn't respond. I cleaned obsessively. Rearranged shelves. Rewashed clothes. Scrubbed the floor twice. It wasn't until the third night, sitting at the window, watching a moth beat its wings against the glass, that I heard her again. Isla, not in voice. Not in sound, but in memory. In her eyes that refused to look down. In her hands that never trembled when she held her Bible. In the way she smiled even when she knew death was coming. She would have gone, without question, because to Isla, truth wasn't something you whispered, it was something you bled for. So I opened the laptop again, typed a reply with shaking fingers. Yes. I will speak. But not as a symbol. Not as a hero. I am only a mother. And this is what happens when silence wins. I hit send. The world felt quieter afterward, not safer. But clearer. I told no one. Packed light, took her cross and her folded note. At the airport, I kept my head down. My passport felt heavy in my hand. My chest tighter with each step closer to the gate. On the plane, I barely breathed. Every announcement sounded like a warning. Every glance felt like surveillance, but I didn't turn back. Because fear hadn't saved her, and it wouldn't save me either. When I arrived, they met me with signs that said my name, not the one on my ID, but the name I gave when I first told her story, Mother of Isla. I nearly collapsed in that moment, not from exhaustion, but because, for the first time, someone had remembered me not as widow, not as disgrace, but as hers. The room was full, not just of people, but of expectation. Cameras lined the walls like eyes. Journalists scribbled in notepads. Activists clutched lanyards and leaflets. Interpreters sat in glass booths, waiting to carry my words into 6 languages. The host introduced me softly. Our next speaker comes with a story few have heard, but all must remember. I stood backstage, heart slamming against my ribs like a bird in a cage. My palms sweated. My legs shook. The stage looked endless. I whispered Isla's name under my breath, and then I walked forward. Point one, step. Point two. Each footfall heavier than the last. The lights blinded me. The silence roared louder than a crowd ever could. The microphone waited, cold, tall, demanding. I took a breath. Nothing came out. My mouth opened, but words died on my tongue. Someone in the front row looked at me, really looked, not with pity, not with judgment, but with waiting, not rushing, not pressuring, just holding space. I gripped the edges of the podium, felt my knuckles turn white, and then, without meaning to, I began, not with facts, not with slogans, but with the truth. My daughter's name was Isla. She died because she believed in Jesus. She died because I was too afraid to stop it. Gasps rippled across the room. I kept going. My voice cracked. My accent thickened. My tears blurred the page I had written. So I stopped reading, and started remembering. I told them about the scream, about the door, about the oil, about the silence. Afterward. I told them about the burial in the dark, the burned journal, the sock I still kept, the moment I crossed myself again. Not for faith, but for her. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Some wept, some couldn't move. I don't remember everything I said, but I remember how it felt, like vomiting years of silence, like ripping open wounds that never closed, like finally bleeding where the world could see. I ended with her name, not softly, not whispered. I shouted it, Isla. The word echoed against marble walls. I didn't care if I was trembling. I didn't care if I was exposed, because in that moment, I wasn't a widow. I wasn't a traitor. I wasn't a ghost. I was her mother, and I had told the truth, for the first time, in the open. They stood, not all at once, but slowly, like rain rising into storm. Applause thundered, hands clapped. Voices cheered. Some simply closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them like prayer. I stepped back. My body felt empty, but my soul, full. Isla had spoken through me, and the world had listened. By morning, the speech had gone viral, clips shared in every language. Mother of Isla trended in over 20 countries. Some called me brave, others called me blasphemous. I opened my inbox and found it overflowing again, but this time, it wasn't just messages. It was articles, headlines, photos. Widow from Riyadh exposes religious violence. From silence to spotlight, one mother's stand. Her daughter died in fire. Now she burns with truth. I scrolled through them numb until I saw a photo of me on the stage, tears down my cheek, hand on my heart, mouth mid-sentence, and below it, my real name, not Mother of Isla. My legal name, the one on my old ID. The one they had no way of knowing, unless someone had given it to them. My stomach turned, because that meant someone was watching, tracking, waiting. The phone rang that night. I didn't answer. No caller ID. It rang again, and again. I finally picked up, static, then a whisper. You've said enough. Clicked. I locked every door, checked every window, pulled the curtains tight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The truth had set something loose. Something that had no face, no voice. Just presence. The organization behind the summit offered me safe housing. A safe name. A safe life. But could anything truly be safe now? Isla's story had become too big, too threatening, too bright, and brightness attracts both hope and hate. That night, I dreamed of fire, but not like the first time. This time, I was standing in the flames, holding her hand, and we were singing. I woke up gasping, not in fear, but in fury, because they still wanted me afraid, still wanted me silent. But silence was a luxury the dead no longer have, and I was no longer among the living they controlled. So I opened my laptop, typed the next piece, not an article, not a speech. A book. The first line read, "They burned my daughter to silence her. Now, I will set the world on fire with her name." And I meant every word. The next few days blurred, talk shows called, podcasts invited me, lawyers reached out. One major publisher offered me a deal. I refused most of it, not because I didn't want the platform, but because I wanted control. I would tell her story my way, not polished, not softened, not censored, but raw, bleeding, true. And then, 2 nights later, someone broke into my safe flat. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. A knife left on the pillow, wrapped in a page from Isla's diary. My heart dropped, because they had touched something sacred, not just to threaten. To desecrate. I held the knife in my hands. Not with fear, but with resolve. They could steal my name. My peace. My safety, but they would never own her truth, and they would never stop me from saying it again, and again, and again. 3 days passed after the break-in. I didn't sleep. I didn't speak. I barely ate. Every sound became a warning. Every silence became a scream. The door creaked. My heart raced. A car slowed outside. My breath stopped. The knife they left wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Isla had died in fire, and now they wanted me to disappear in silence. The publisher emailed again. Do you want to delay release? The NGO called. Should we relocate you again? But I didn't answer, because I didn't know anymore. Not what was safe, not what was right, only what hurt. And it all hurt. I kept hearing her cry, her whisper, the final "Mama, please," and I thought, if I stop now, does she die a second time? But if I go on, do I die next? Isla had faith, not the fragile kind, the defiant kind. She didn't believe because it was easy, she believed because it was worth dying for. Could I do the same? The questions circled me like vultures, and then, the letter came, not electronic. Hand-delivered. No return address. No name. Inside, a photo, a black and white, grainy dot of me, walking to the store 2 days earlier. Alone. Underneath, in ink, 1 bullet. Ends all this. I dropped the letter, sat on the floor, stared at nothing. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't words on a screen or rumors in the street. This was a trigger. A scope. A moment away from silence. I paced for hours, checked locks, rechecked them. Then sat with her cross in my hand like it could shield me, but it couldn't. Neither could the guards, neither could walls. Only one thing could, truth, because if I stopped now, they'd win. They'd say Isla was a lie, that her death was fiction, that her voice was nothing but wind, and I, her mother, would fade into the background of her story, just another frightened woman. Silenced before the final page, but I was not background. I was witness, and witnesses don't get to disappear, they get to testify, even if it kills them. So I wrote again, not because I was brave, but because I was broken, and sometimes, broken voices shake the ground. I sent a final draft of the book. I titled it, Her Name Was Isla, A Mother's Fire. And then I recorded a video. My face uncovered. My voice unedited. If you're watching this, it means I kept going. Or I didn't. Either way, you'll know the truth. Then I closed the laptop, locked it, sat in the dark, and waited for morning. Or for something else. I thought the story was done. I thought I'd told everything there was to tell. The screams, the oil, the silence, but stories have layers, and sometimes, the deepest one doesn't reveal itself until you're ready to bleed again. The knock came just after dusk. 3 short raps, sharp, measured. I froze. No one knocked here. Not without warning. Not without reason. I crept to the peephole. It was him. My eldest, the one who hadn't spoken to me in over a year, the one who called me a traitor, a disgrace, and now, he stood at my door, thinner, older, eyes sunken with something I couldn't name. I opened it without a word. He stepped inside like a man walking through a graveyard. He didn't sit. Didn't take off his shoes. He just looked at me, and said, "You don't know everything." The air shifted, something ancient stirred between us. I didn't speak. I let him. That night, the night she died, I saw him. I was awake. I felt my knees weaken. He continued. I heard her screaming too. But I didn't move. I was scared. I thought if I stayed in my room, it would stop. He looked down. But it didn't. The silence was thick. Then, he reached into his jacket, pulled out something wrapped in a cloth, placed it on the table, unwrapped it slowly. It was her Bible, scorched, warped, but intact. My breath caught. He tried to burn it, he said. I found it behind the furnace. I couldn't throw it away. My hand shook as I touched it, the pages curled like dried leaves, but her name was still there, written in blue ink, the way she always signed things, with a heart at the end. I read it, he whispered. After she died. And I kept reading. He paused. And I started, believing. My heart stopped. He looked at me, not as a son, but as someone broken. Seeking. I left him, Mama. I left his house. I left his God. Tears burned my eyes. He stepped closer. I came to tell you. I'm sorry. And I want to fight with you. For her. For him. I couldn't speak. I just reached out, held him, the son I thought I'd lost, the boy who had once turned away, now returned, not just as blood, but as believer. The room seemed to breathe again, like something holy had entered, something Isla had prayed for. And as we stood there, holding each other over her scorched Bible, I knew. Her story wasn't over. It was multiplying, through me, through him, through every voice that dared to say her name. For the first time in years, I didn't need a loan. We sat across from each other, my son and I, in a quiet kitchen too small for revolution. He ate slowly, like he hadn't tasted food in days. Between bites, we barely spoke, there was nothing to say, yet everything had changed. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something more fragile. More sacred, hope. That night, we lit a candle together, not for prayer, not for ritual, but for her, for Isla. He placed her Bible in the center of the table, open to a page she had marked with a pressed flower. The petals had dried into memory. She wrote something here, he said, pointing. I leaned closer, the ink was faded, but her handwriting was unmistakable. When the world silences me, may someone else shout. When I'm gone, let fire speak instead of flesh. I touched the page with trembling fingers. She had always known, always prepared for the day her voice would need another body, and now, ours were the ones she chose. We didn't sleep. We made lists. Of allies. Of safe houses. Of names we could trust, and names we couldn't. He still had contacts, old friends from university. Now working with foreign NGOs, they could get us access, platforms, protection, but most importantly, reach. We began planning the next phase. Not just a book, not just a speech, but a movement, with a name, with a face, with a fire that could not be put out. But movements require fuel, and enemies never sleep. By morning, Our apartment had been breached again, not physically, digitally, our router fried, emails locked, social accounts wiped, every trace of our existence vanished in under 2 hours, but we were ready. We had backups, encrypted copies, offline drives, burner phones. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were strategists. At noon, a package arrived, unmarked. Inside, a flash drive, plugged in, it played a video security footage from a camera I didn't know existed. It showed my building. Me, exiting. A man following, frame by frame, zoomed on his face, blurred, but recognizable. My husband, still free, still watching, still hunting. I couldn't breathe. My son stared at the screen, fists clenched. "We have to move now," he said, but I shook my head. "No. We go forward." He looked at me like I was mad. "You saw the video. And now the world will too," I replied. "We use it." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway, because fear was a familiar cage, and I had outgrown it. We contacted the summit's media team, sent them the footage, requested an urgent broadcast. They agreed. In 24 hours. We would go live. No script. No filter. No retreat. The world would see what monsters looked like when they wore the mask of God. The countdown had begun, and so had the reckoning. The studio was cold, not in temperature, but in weight. Lights hummed, cameras blinked. A red LED sign above the glass wall read, "Live in 013." I sat beside my son, shoulders squared, hands steady. The producer gave us final instructions: speak slow, speak clear, no curse words, no names we can't legally defend. But we had one name. One that needed no defense, only exposure. "He's still out there," I whispered. "That's why we're here," my son replied. The countdown began. 3. I thought of Isla, her eyes, her screams, her silence. 2. I felt the knife again, the fear, the fire. 1. The red light turned solid, and the world was watching. I leaned into the microphone. "My name is Aisha. I am not a politician. I am not a hero. I am a mother. And my daughter was murdered by a man you still invite into your mosques." The air snapped. No intro. No apology, just truth. My son took over. He showed the video frame by frame, the face of the man behind me in the alley, the man who raised us with sermons, who preached love while boiling his own child. "His name is Ahmad," my son said. "He was my father. But not anymore." The producer flinched, the staff exchanged looks, but we kept going. We showed documents, scans of her burned journal, medical records falsified by a family doctor. A forged death certificate, and then the flash drive, security footage. Of the apartment. Of me. Of him, still stalking, still unpunished. I looked directly into the lens. "If I disappear, let this video be my gravestone. If he comes for us, let the world know what he came to silence." My son placed Isla's Bible on the desk, held it up, pages blistered, but not destroyed. "This book survived fire. Just like her voice. And now, her fire speaks through us." The comments exploded, across screens, across continents, some praising, some cursing, some praying. We didn't stop. We read her words. We said her name. We didn't blink, not when death threats came, not when our faces lit up international news, not when governments issued statements condemning all forms of religious violence. We had heard that before. What we wanted was action, arrest, justice, truth without delay. By the time the stream ended, the world had changed, not because of us, because of her. Hyla, her name was on the tongues of millions, and no one could erase it now, not with bullets, not with knives, not with shame. The broadcast ended. We took off the mics, stepped into the hallway, and just for a second, I let myself exhale, not relief, but resolve, because telling the truth was never the end. It was the beginning of war. The world did not whisper back. It roared. By sunrise, my inbox was flooded again, but this time, so was the news. My name. My face. His name. His face, side by side on every screen. Ex-imam accused of filicide. Burning faith, mother exposes hidden crimes. The woman who spoke the unspeakable. Some called me a hero, some called me a liar, some called for my arrest. Within 48 hours, 3 countries issued warrants for him. Interpol flagged his travel, but no one knew where he was, not even I. My son watched the news like a hawk. They're turning this into a war, he said. He wasn't wrong. On one side, support, solidarity, candlelight vigils, protest banners with Isla's name. On the other, outrage, threats, fatwas, scholars condemning us for defamation of the faith. They didn't deny what happened, they just denied our right to say it. Every interview we gave brought another warning. Every article sparked new hate, phone numbers leaked, our location guessed, someone set fire to a mailbox outside our building, someone hacked our landlord's phone. We moved again, then again, and again, but the movement only grew. #Justice for Isla trended worldwide. Survivors reached out, women from Riyadh, girls from Egypt, mothers from Afghanistan. They sent emails, photos, scans of journals, voice notes that broke my heart. They tried to burn me too. I thought I was the only one. Your voice saved mine. And yet, in the midst of all this light, darkness struck back. An international religious board labeled us apostate agitators. Our bank account was frozen. A bounty was rumored, $200,000 for either of us, dead or alive. The publisher paused the book launch. Too dangerous, they said, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. We had crossed a line that no longer let us turn around. Isla's story wasn't just a story now. It was a weapon, and every time someone spoke it, they struck a blow against silence, but it was heavy. Every step forward felt like dragging chains. My body wore the burden. I coughed blood one morning, collapsed in a hotel bathroom, hospitalized under a false name. My son stood at my bedside, eyes red, jaw clenched. We need help. He meant legal. He meant medical. He meant divine, because truth had ignited the world, but it had also scorched us with it. I held his hand, smiled weakly. Then let it burn. Until they see what ashes can bloom into. And in that sterile room, surrounded by machines and whispers, I made a decision. One final strike, not just for Isla, but for every girl still waiting in the dark. It was the last file she ever hid, the one Isla never spoke of, not in her journal, not in her prayers, not in whispers under her breath. My son found it buried in an old USB stick, taped beneath the floorboard of her closet. He almost missed it. Inside, scanned documents, email threads, photos, financial records. Web, names, transfers, connections, and at the center, Ahmad, not just a killer, but a protected asset. I read through it slowly, nausea rising with every click. He was paid. By religious boards. By foreign donors. By charity organizations that claimed to help women and children. He was their golden preacher, their symbol of a moderate faith. And they knew about Isla. They saw the photos, they read the medical reports, they silenced the doctors, moved witnesses, rewrote the narrative, labeled it a mental breakdown caused by Western influence. I stared at the final page. An email from a senior religious figure to a government official: let her die quietly. The boy will fall in line. The mother won't speak. They were wrong. I didn't die. My son didn't fall in line, and now, we would speak. Everywhere. To everyone, with names, dates, screenshots, receipts. We spent 3 days verifying every detail, then, on the 4th, we leaked it all. A 128-page dossier, titled, How Faith Was Used to Kill My Daughter. We sent it to human rights groups, international courts, major media outlets, and posted it ourselves, every platform, every language. No edits. No redactions, raw, the bleeding, unstoppable. The explosion was immediate. Governments issued statements, religious leaders resigned. A major charity shut down overnight. Interpol upgraded Ahmad's file to most wanted. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them, the enablers, the cowards, the bureaucrats who let her die with full knowledge of what they protected. I received thousands of messages, some in gratitude, some in horror, some in fury, and one, from an anonymous sender. It read, "You've burned the house down. Now they'll come with everything they have." And I smiled, because it meant they were afraid of a woman with no guns. No money, just truth, and a dead daughter who refused. I sat down, turned on the camera. No makeup. No lights, just me, and her Bible. I looked straight ahead and said silence returned, but not the kind I once feared. This silence was different, heavy, thick, the kind that settles after an explosion, when the debris still floats in the air, and no one dares to move. We had burned the temple, unveiled the priests, named the gods that demanded sacrifice, and now, no one came knocking, not police, not press, not friends. The world, it seemed, had frozen, the headlines slowed, the outrage faded into algorithms, and we were left, alone. My son rarely spoke. He spent hours by the window, eyes tracking nothing. I watched him sometimes, wondering if I'd taken his life too, not with fire, but with purpose too heavy for his shoulders. I wanted to tell him he could go, that he didn't owe me this war. But he stayed, maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of grief. Or maybe, because this was the only way he could still be with her. I coughed blood again, twice. The doctors said nothing was conclusive. But we knew the body keeps score, and mine was exhausted. I wrote less, slept more, dreamed often. Of her, always her, sometimes a child, sometimes full grown, sometimes burning, sometimes laughing, but always out of reach. One night, I dreamt she stood at the foot of my bed, not in flames, not in agony, but glowing. Calm, she reached for me and said, "You did it, Mama. Now rest." I woke up crying, not in sorrow, but in release, because I had held my breath for so long. I forgot what air felt like, but what now? What comes after the scream, after the strike, after the whole world hears you, and yet your house remains empty? I walked through our apartment. Quiet halls, peeling wallpaper, suitcases never unpacked, books unopened. Time paused. I opened her Bible again, same page, same pressed flower, but this time, I noticed a second note, one I'd missed before. Faint, scribbled in the margin. "If I'm gone, write me into the world." I stared at it for hours, and then, I began to, not in manifestos, not in speeches, but in small things, letters to girls in shelters, voicemails to mothers too scared to speak, blankets sent in secret to women hiding in border camps. No signatures. No headlines, just love, wrapped in silence, and that silence, it healed more than it hurt, because this wasn't about rage anymore. It was about presence, about saying, "I see you. I hear you. You are not alone." They invited me to speak again. Not to accuse, not to warn, but to remember. It was a memorial, for all the daughters whose names never made it into headlines, and for the ones still whispering their faith under their breath. I almost said no. I was tired. My hands shook when I tried to hold a cup. My legs ached after 10 steps, but this wasn't about me anymore. It never truly was. So I said yes. The auditorium wasn't grand. It smelled of old carpet and cheap tea, but the chairs were filled. Women, men, youth, survivors. Some wore crosses. Some wore headscarves. All carried something that had once been too heavy to say out loud. My son stood in the wings, not as my protector, but as a witness. He would speak after me, carry the flame into a future I wouldn't see. I stepped onto the stage. No podium. No script, just her Bible in my hands, her name on my tongue. My daughter's name was Isla. Silence, the kind that listens. She believed in Jesus. And for that, she was burned. But that is not how she will be remembered. I looked out. Saw eyes wet with recognition. She will be remembered as a girl who loved deeply. Who questioned. Who hoped. And who prayed not to escape, but to endure. A pause. Then, they killed her body. But they failed to bury her voice. I opened the Bible. Held it up. This survived the fire. And now, her words live in all of you. A murmur moved through the crowd. Grief, solidarity, maybe even resurrection. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Let this be her gravestone. And your beginning." Then, I stepped back. My son walked forward, his hand steady, his voice sure. He didn't talk about her death. He spoke of her dreams. Of the world she wanted. Of the pages in her journal that no one burned, where she wrote of shelters for girls like her. Of safe houses for converts. Of scholarships for exiles, and he announced them point one by one. Projects now funded, programs now built. In her name. In her honor. He finished with a phrase that made my breath catch, "She isn't gone. She's just multiplied." The room stood. No clapping, just standing. A kind of holy silence. Then someone whispered, "Isla." And another, then more, until the room breathed her name in unison, soft, steady, alive. I wept, not for loss, but for legacy, and for the first time since that night, I believed it too. She lived. I feel it now, not like pain, not like fear, but like fog lifting after a long night. My body is slower, The mirror shows less of me each day. I don't fight it. I don't beg for more time. I've lived the kind of life where every minute past silence feels like mercy. I walk less, speak less, but I watch, and I listen. The world has shifted, not perfectly, not enough, but undeniably. A school in Lebanon now bears her name. A safe house in Sudan was built in her honor. A digital archive collects stories like hers, each voice a candle refusing to be snuffed out. Sometimes, I see her face in strangers. In a girl raising her hand in defiance. In a mother refusing to sign a silence document. In a boy gripping a burned Bible like it's the only truth left. She's everywhere now, and I am content. My son checks on me daily. He's stronger, bolder. He speaks at conferences, leads initiatives, writes essays in her name. He tells people she taught him how to live, even as she died. I don't correct him, because it's true. Isla was the teacher. I was only the amplifier. One night, I sat down with my journal, the same kind I once bought for Isla when she was 10. Brown leather. No lines. I wrote a letter, not for the world, not for my son, but for her. You were always the flame. I was just the hand that protected it from wind. You dreamed of gardens. I only cleared the stones. You burned, child. But now you rise. In pages. In names. In girls who no longer hide their prayers. I folded the page, slipped it between the Bible's covers, closed it gently. And placed it on my nightstand. I sleep more now, dream softer. I see her often, sometimes we walk in silence, sometimes she laughs. Last night, she asked me, "Are you ready?" And I smiled, because yes. I am, not because I have nothing left, but because everything I carried now lives in someone else. In hundreds. In thousands. In all those who said her name and refuse to forget. So when the moment comes, when breath shortens, when light fades, I won't rage. I won't beg. I will whisper one word, the same one I screamed into the basement door. The same one I carried through flame, fear, and fury. Isla. And in that name, I will find peace. When they ask me what this story was about, I don't say grief. I don't say fire. I don't say death. I say love, not the kind they preach in pulpits. Not the kind that demands obedience in exchange for belonging, but the kind that burns down walls, that rewrites bloodlines, that whispers to the silenced, "You are sacred. You are enough. You are seen." This was never just about Isla, and yet, it was always only about her. Her voice, her courage, her defiance wrapped in gentleness. She taught me that survival is not the same as living, that silence is not the same as peace, that a girl with a Bible can shake empires. If someone dares to listen, you listened, you sat with this story. You carried her name, you didn't turn away, and because of that, she lives. Every time you light a candle for someone you never met, every time you question the voices that claim to own truth, every time you tell a girl, your voice matters. She lives, not in tombstones, not in tears, but in action. In echo. In name spoken without shame. We built no statue for her. No monument stands with her face, but somewhere, a child reads her story and decides not to hide their faith. Somewhere, a mother stands between her daughter and the flames, and says, "Not again." Somewhere, a man breaks the chain, lays down the knife, and chooses grace. That is resurrection, that is revolution, that is what they couldn't burn. I have said all I needed to say, not because the pain is gone, not because justice is finished, but because I believe that the story is safe now, not in books, but in you. So promise me, don't forget her. Don't dilute her. Don't let them rewrite her as a warning. Let her remain a war cry, let her remain a song, let her remain exactly what she was, a girl who believed. A daughter who burned. A name that will not die. Isla, say it out loud, say it when you're afraid, say it when no one else will, say it for the ones who still cannot, and when your voice shakes, let it, because even trembling truth is stronger than silence. Isla, she walked through fire, and now, she walks through us.